this border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
Green keeps it himself, looking for the end zone. Isaiah Green, touchdown! Quarterback keeper for 17, and Marshall back up by 2 touchdowns.
Story toward Jackson, got separation to the 20, to the 10, and he will go. Lucky Jackson from 54 yards out. After a Western Kentucky record 16 catches a week ago, he gives the Hilltoppers the early lead today.
Pressure off the edge. Screen delivers. What a catch for Levias, who brings it in. Armani Levias to the house. Touchdown, Marshall.
And will 46 come on the field? Yes, he will. Corey Munson, the freshman, the true freshman out of Warner Robins, Georgia. As long as 48. This will be from 52 yards. From the far hash mark, John Haggerty, the punter, will hold. Jared Nash will snap it. It's definitely long enough. It is good! Unbelievable. The true freshman, Corey Munson, hammers it home from 52 yards. What a clutch kick there to win the ball game.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Katie and Trace with you here this evening, and we've got a very special guest from the Towel Rack WKU, some of our buddies over on Twitter. We've got Christian Blair with us on the episode this week, and we're going to be discussing, I don't know if you read the article that Christian put out getting close to about a week ago, but if you haven't found it, man, go find it on the Towel Rack at the Towel Rack WKU, because it's all about this Conference USA Sunbelt merger that we've been talking about, and we keep trying to breathe life into because it's such a good idea. But anyway, that article that Christian wrote has so much good information, like logistic information about distances between schools and how travel costs could theoretically be, I'm going to use the word slashed, because I think it could be slashed quite significantly. So welcome, Christian. We're glad to have you on the show. This is going to be a lot of fun this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, guys.
No problem whatsoever. We're looking into, like I said, we're going to try to keep banging the drum of this Conference USA Sunbelt merger because we think it's the most common sense thing. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I put out a poll the other day on the Moonshine Throwdown Twitter account about what our followers and fans think would be the best, most ideal situation if conference realignment becomes a thing. And, you know, in the wake of COVID-19 and all the budgets struggling with these smaller schools and everybody's looking for a creative solution to the problem, it's kind of forced that conversation back to the forefront. And it may become a very real thing. And honestly, I think it really should be. And anyway, in that poll, I put out 3 alternatives to where folks could vote to what they think the ideal situation was. Number 1 was, of course, the Conference USA East and the Sunbelt East and the Conference USA West and the Sunbelt West split right down the middle, and then they merge with each other, East and West to limit that footprint and give both conferences 12 teams. So really, you're not skipping a beat too much. Another alternative was that Marshall, Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee State, and I'm going with Charlotte over Old Dominion because I like the idea of Charlotte going south a little bit in the wintertime, maybe a little warmer climate. Charlotte seems to be more of an uptrend than Old Dominion. Yeah. Marshall, Western, Middle Tennessee State, and Charlotte joining the MAC East and pushing Buffalo and Bowling Green State University to the MAC West. So that would give a nice even conference. There'd be 8 teams per conference or per division. That's a 16-team conference. We're getting into that mega conference type thing. And then the last option, which actually got more votes than I thought it was going to get, was if the current Conference USA East adds, I said 4, but I did the math earlier before we went live, and you actually have to add 5 to get to 12 teams of the better FCS schools. So we're going to talk about all those, give our personal pros and cons for each one of those alternatives. And then as a consensus, you know, we'll figure out what we 3 think is the best, and we're going to dive deep into that. So without further hesitation, I mean, let's get into it. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Where do you want to start? Christian, you're the guest this week. Which alternative, which choice would you like to start with, just doing some pros and cons? We're going to do them all, but you can pick where we're going to start.
I think we should start at the bottom with the FCS schools.
Okay.
Kind of merging up with Commerce USA.
Okay. So oddly enough, that did have a fair amount of votes. I guess people just don't like the MAC for whatever reason, but we did some, in the poll, it just said 4 FCS schools, but Trace and I actually talked about this, on our own before I put that poll out, and we came up with the teams that we thought would be the ideal add. Now, under the caveat that we have all power, we can add the FCS teams that we want. The only thing that we really can't do is cherry pick teams from the FBS. That's why it's a straight split from the divisions in the Sun Belt, and the MAC stays intact. So the teams we chose for FCS teams were James Madison, William and Mary, Furman, Eastern Kentucky, and Austin P. Now, I know Western Kentucky fans will turn their nose up at that a little bit. They really don't want to be in a conference with Eastern Kentucky, and probably Austin P doesn't sound too good. But when we look down football and basketball and geographic location, those 5 were really the 5 that sounded the best. So let's talk about pros and cons with the Conference USA East Division adding James Madison, William and Mary, Furman, Austin P, and Eastern Kentucky. Christian, take it away.
All right, so I'm probably going to start with the cons here. So when you're looking at the facilities that some of these teams are working with, like Furman, like I looked up their stadium online, and honestly, it doesn't look that much bigger than my high school field. And so diving deeper into that, you start to look at the attendance figures. And I know for FBS, they require you to have an attendance of 15,000, or I think that's what it is.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
There's plenty that don't meet that.
Yeah. And so I was looking at a couple just like polls up on Furman of their attendance figures for last year. And I think it was about like 2,000 a game.
Wow.
So, yeah, so pretty low. So, and it was the same for William and Mary. They were also pretty low, and their stadium's even smaller. I think it only seats like 12,000 people. So that was definitely a big con for me, was going to be the facilities that these teams are playing in at the FBS level.
So one thing to keep in mind is that we did not totally revolve this around football, because we know Western really, really loves its basketball, and Bowling Green, Kentucky is a basketball first city. We all know that, and we're okay with that. So that's the reason we chose teams like Furman and William and Mary, because Furman last year in basketball was a 25-win basketball team. Yeah. And William and Mary was a 21-win basketball team. And, William and Mary's had NCAA past success. And, I don't know too much about Furman, but, Austin P was a 20-win basketball team. Really, the crappiest one out of all those was James Madison. They were a 9-win basketball team, but they bring the star power of those teams to football. So it was kind of a yin and yang type thing. We didn't want to make this all football heavy, but those are good arguments. Now, I would, not that I'm here or Trace is here or whatever, but if you have a counterpoint when one of us makes them, you should speak up on that. And my counterpoint to that is Furman's, I would expect their attendance and all of these, most of them really, their football attendance to increase, because how up can you get for playing Furman against Eastern Kentucky or Furman against Murray State? But you start bringing in teams like Florida Atlantic, Florida International, Western, Marshall, Middle Tennessee. Maybe you see a bump in attendance for a little while. So that's just something to consider. But yeah, it's going to take a big investment to get those stadiums up to par. But again, we have all power. The NCAA can't tell us what we're going to do. So what about positives? What do you see positive with just taking our 7 teams out of the East and adding 5 of the better type geographically located FCS teams?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I mean, it's going to be better for everyone, obviously, on travel costs, especially for some of those smaller schools like Furman, which I'm pretty sure is a private school. So they probably don't have all the funding in the world to send their kids all over the country to play sports. So that would definitely help them and a lot of the other schools out a lot. And that's probably the main positive for me. I don't know what you guys were thinking on that note, but
yeah, I mean, of course, most of this is all predicated on reducing traveling costs. That's kind of why we're having these discussions, or they're out in the world, period, right now. because so many schools are hurting. But I'm with you, Trace. What do you got about some negatives maybe for adding FCS teams to our division lineup?
Yeah, a lot of those same answers. I mean, one vague thing to say is they're FCS schools. I mean, that's just kind of like, it's not that some of them can't compete. It's just that they're a lower level and everything. I mean, like you said, like the stadiums are just so much smaller and the attendances are so low. Even for Conference USA standards, their attendances are low. So they're low if they're low for Conference USA standards. And, it's just, I don't know. Now, could some of those teams, like I said, could some of those teams compete? I think they could. I mean, obviously, if you put James Madison in the Conference USA, could they win it right off the bat? They could have a chance.
Have a good shot.
They'd have a shot. You better believe they would have a shot. So, I mean, but I don't know. It just seems like it's a little bit of a stretch. And, like, the fact that it wouldn't excite any Conference USA fans to be like, oh, we have Austin Peay now, or we have Furman. I just don't think that would be exciting enough and enticing enough for a lot of people, and that's a big deal in its own right. So I think, honestly, there are more cons than pros, but a couple pros, but I think there's more cons.
Yeah. So what about those pros? What is good about that idea for you?
Well, a couple things I'm thinking about. Obviously, the geography, that's the big thing because it's a lot closer, a lot more better geographical footprint for the Conference USA East Division teams. Not as far. It's not having to go to El Paso or San Antonio, or it's a lot better in that regard. Probably save money, obviously, and it's just easier on everybody. And then the other pro to me is they would get James Madison, and I mean that in its own right, James Madison for football, that's a big deal. I mean, that's a program that's a top FCS program. They're really an FBS mid-major trapped in an FCS world. That's kind of what they are to me. Like, I think I know I said it recently on one of the other podcasts we did that I think they kind of like being the big fish in a small pond in the FCS. But I think if you put them in Conference USA or any other Group of Five conference, they could compete immediately. Their attendances are very competitive within Conference USA. They averaged last year 18,000 and change per game. That would be definitely I looked it up, and that's definitely higher than at least 7 Conference USA averages last year, maybe 8, depending on a couple numbers. So, I mean, they could immediately fit in. But, I mean, I think those two pros are pretty good there, especially JMU. But, like I said, I think there's more cons, honestly.
Yeah, there's definitely more cons. For me, the only positives, you named it, is that you reduce the footprint geographically for the conference as a whole, not just including the number of states, but the mileage between, your farthest potential traveling partner, or not partner, but destination is greatly reduced, and you don't have to worry about sending your volleyball team to El Paso, or something crazy like that. But other than that, I mean, it's really about I guess positives, more drivability for your fans. So if they want to go to away games, they would have a better opportunity to do that and make a weekend out of it. So if you want to look at it that way, that's good. You also have the potential to maybe create some new rivalries within states that, we already have a footprint in North Carolina with Charlotte. Then you bring in, some little closer, maybe another Virginia school, like you're talking Old Dominion now, James Madison, William and Mary. And Kentucky bring Eastern Kentucky, of course, Western. They already have a rivalry. So, you have the potential to build some new ones and build on some older ones, take some older ones to another level. Huge negatives for me is the media deal. No media outlet's going to pay you squat for this conference lineup. None. No. Nothing whatsoever. This reeks of Tuesday, Wednesday night MAC media deal.
Or worse.
But you won't get the money that they get. So if you want to take, I don't even think Stadium, and I kind of like Stadium's broadcast. I think they do a good job, but they're not paying a bunch of money for Conference USA. Well, they pay even less for this lineup. And of course, no fans are going to get excited about that. You mentioned it, and it's just not, anything you're going to be pumped over. I think you almost want to keep the Conference USA that you have versus bringing, leaving even if it means going to Texas, but. So, yeah, I think you're right. This is by far probably the third of the 3 alternatives that I gave. Trace, I'm guessing you want to talk MAC next and save the best for last. So let's talk about the MAC, Trace. Positives and negatives. If the Conference USA not the whole East Division, just Marshall, Western, Middle Tennessee State, and Charlotte leave the Conference USA as we know it and join the MAC, going into the MAC East, joining Miami, Ohio, Ohio University, Kent State, and Akron in an 8-team division, sending Buffalo and Bowling Green State University to the West Division of the MAC to join Eastern, Western, and Central Michigan's Ball State, Northern Illinois, and Toledo to form that 8-team division conference, or 8-team division. So positives and negatives about the MAC.
Well, positive, I think it's a very similar to the last one. Geography has to be a positive here, I think. I mean, so many of the MAC schools are located in like Ohio areas. I mean, that's not far at all for most of the Conference USA East teams, especially Marshall. I mean, back when Marshall was in the MAC, fans could go to practically every away game just because they were all so close. And I mean, a lot of those schools will be pretty close to Western and Middle and whoever else. But I think that's definitely a plus there. I mean, the MAC. Another thing is the MAC's got a pretty good. They have a more long-standing tradition of they've kept their conference intact for the most part. Like they've had a pretty solid job of keeping, even through all the conference realignment, they've managed to keep the conference together, which is hard to do. I mean, there's been a couple of teams here and there pop up and leave or whatever, like UMass. But I mean, other than they keep it tight together. I mean, the MAC sticks together pretty well. I mean, and I guess if you want to look at it like this, I know your opinion on it, Katie, very heavily. They're on national TV. If you want to call it that, they're on national TV. But I mean, I don't know if that's probably not really a positive. But I mean, that's one way to look at it, I guess. So I mean, as far as positive, that's pretty much all I got, really.
All right. How about the negatives of joining the MAC? Well,
negative is just the fact that the MAC East is a weaker division in the MAC. And I looked up the numbers on that, and it screams the MAC East is the weaker division of the two. I compared several different categories of the MAC East to the MAC West since 2014. The MAC East has 2 conference titles to 4 in the West, overall winning percentage of 41.6% to 51% for the West. Final teams that ended up ranked, the MAC West had 1, MAC East had 0. Power 5 wins, MAC West has 12, MAC East has 8. Bowl wins. The bowl wins is the only thing the East has. They have 7-2 advantage there. And then draft picks, the MAC West has 27, MAC East has 11. So it's a pretty big, other than the bowl wins, the MAC West is by far the better division. So like it would be kind of a little, kind of playing some lesser teams, I mean, for the most part. And then, but that's really, I mean, a pretty big con there. And the fact, like we said, you kind of joking about it, but I mean, being on Tuesday night and Wednesday night for practically a whole month of the season where nobody's going to be at the games live is kind of a con, obviously, because I mean, you can't make any money at the gate, so to speak. So, I mean, I don't know. But for me, what sticks out like a sore thumb is the fact that the East is just lesser than the West. So
yeah. Well, it might be, but you're adding 4 decent teams from Conference USA. You'll bolster that East right up.
Maybe.
All right, Christian. Pros and cons of joining the MAC.
Yeah, well, before we dive into it, I just want to say the MAC, they did a really good job in the East. So they got 5 teams from Ohio in the same division. So that's really good planning on their part, just to really reducing those travel costs we're talking about. But in terms of pros, my biggest pro would probably be that being a Western Kentucky fan, we get to conserve those rivalries with Marshall and Middle Tennessee, bring them over, so we'll get to play them every year still. I know the same for Marshall, getting to play Western every year.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest pro for me. And obviously, like you guys are saying, geographically, it'd probably be even better than the FCS because, I mean, you got those 5 schools in Ohio and then Marshall and Western, Middle Tennessee all pretty much on top of each other.
Yeah.
And then on the other side for the cons for me, just like you guys said, playing on Tuesday and Wednesday, it's really hard to build tradition and pageantry in college football when you can't have the band parading around on Saturday morning before game day. And I don't know, it's kind of a different environment just watching a game on a Tuesday or Wednesday night than it would be a Saturday noon game or in the afternoon.
Well, I tell you what, for me, joining the MAC is the deal breaker is Maction, because you kill your future fan bases, your ability to build a fan base, because nobody's going to the games on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights because, most adults are going to have to work the next day, and it's a school night for kids, and the college kids are probably out having fun doing something else, or they're doing homework, so it just, from all angles, it kills your ability to continue to grow a fan base, not even maintain the one you have, just grow one. So that to me is just terrible. And I don't care, people will say, I love Maction. Yeah, you do love it. You love it from your living room sitting and watching it on TV, just like the Ohio University fan is doing. He's not at the game. He's in his living room watching the game. So that to me is the absolute deal breaker. I don't even need another negative, but that's just the biggest one. The positives, I guess, if I have to name some, for Western Kentucky, yeah, you get your historic rival in Middle Tennessee State. You get your new rival in Marshall. For Marshall, you get your new rival in Western Kentucky, and you get to go back and play your historical rival, Ohio University. So it's a win-win for those two teams for sure. And of course, Middle Tennessee State gets to play Western, just like I said. So it's kind of a win for them. Charlotte, I just feel like they should be happy to be in a conference because they're finally starting to show signs of life in football, which is nice. Their basketball was up many, many moons ago, and it's the worst of roller coaster rides for Charlotte. It's a very big hill right now they're going down. So I feel like to be included in something like this and just not be left flapping in the wind should be a win for Charlotte. But I just can't get excited about the MAC. I just can't. From a geographic standpoint, it's close knit. I mean, you talk about just a handful of states. Most of them are in Ohio. You get 3 teams in Michigan, and then they're kind of scattered around. There's one in Indiana, one in Illinois, one in New York, and then whatever the Conference USA team, four teams in 4 states. So it is what it is. But let's get to the cream of the crop. This is the one that I think everybody is the most excited about, at least on my timeline. And it's not just been that way for a week. It's been that way for literally months. Long before COVID-19 reared its ugly head, people just get fed up with Conference USA, and they think it's absolutely terrible that we have to travel to Texas all the time, and it's such a budget killer, and this, that, and the other. And this alternative conference realignment has been talked about for a long, long time. And that, of course, is the straight split and merger of Conference USA and the Sun Belt, east to east and west to west. And I tell you, every time I look at this, it just looks better and better and better. And even I get more and more excited about the potential lineup of teams. I'll admit, the first time I looked at it, I was like, outside of Appalachian State, I mean, nothing really does it for me. And it's not that you're bringing in these high quality teams, but you start looking down the Sun Belt East and you're like, is this really any worse than, the teams we're playing in the West as it is? And you're thinking, not really. So let's talk about it. Christian, you did this awesome article. I read it like top to bottom, and it was so chock full of information and interesting information, not just data points and, bullet points, but useful information. So, of course, you've got to share as much of that as you can for the folks that either did not see that article or did not read all the way through it, which I don't know why you would start it and not finish it. It was awesome. But you got to talk about that. I know Trace put together a walloping amount of awesome data that will hopefully by the end of this segment cement anybody's opinion that is listening to this podcast that this is absolutely the way to go, even if it means burning some bridges with Conference USA teams that we like. This is the way to go. So let's talk about some positives. Actually, I don't care what you want to talk. You want the negatives or positives? I don't care. Either way you want to start. Just talk about this merger option that we have on the table.
Yeah, so just starting off, like Conference USA, I mean, it really is its name. It spans basically the entire United States. I mean, you got El Paso all the way to Virginia.
Yeah.
I mean, that if you're driving, that's more than a 24-hour drive. Just ridiculous. And so definitely a positive is just the geographic nature of the conference. And so actually my paper, because I mean, people will listen to this, but if they don't, I know some people, if they don't see any numbers, they're not going to really, look at it. So I took the total area of Conference USA, and then I took it of a Sunbelt East merger if we were to do such a thing, and it cut it by a third. I mean, that's pretty incredible, just having that amount of teams in such a less amount of area than Conference USA spans right now.
I'm looking up something real quick. When you talk about cutting that by the third, you got to I'll put a number to that. So I just now Googled the distance between Norfolk, Virginia and El Paso, Texas. 1,983 miles. Okay.
At all?
So cut that by a third, right? That's 650 miles roughly that you've just eliminated from the conference as a whole, or, from the longest point. I mean, that's a freaking, how many hours drive is that alone? 8, I mean, good Lord, that's like a 10-hour drive. So, but you also took some of that data and you picked, I can't remember exactly how you did. You picked a couple of different teams, right? It wasn't just all based around, say, Western Kentucky.
Yeah. So I took a team from either the Sun Belt or Conference USA in a certain region of the United States. So, for example, I think I took Florida International was my south region. And so on paper, they have like the worst draw, even if this conference realignment were to happen. But even then, they still cut their average distance between opponent and the conference by about 200 miles. So, I mean, even from the team that's like the furthest away from all the other teams, they're still benefiting no matter what.
Of course, because they're traveling. I would assume that means that FIU's farthest travel destination is Norfolk, because you've eliminated the West of Conference USA. So the northernmost team in this Sun Belt Conference USA realignment would be Norfolk, because they're the northernmost in the Conference USA East anyway. So they're going there anyway. So it's not like this is something new that they're taking on. So really they're reducing travel by a lot more than what necessarily those numbers will point out, because they're already going to Norfolk. Okay. That's not coming into the equation. So really they've eliminated a ton of travel by not having to go to Denton, Texas, or all the way out to El Paso that we keep harping on, or any of these other places, Houston or whatever. Now, of course, the thing that people hate the most, and I don't mean to cut in on you, but the people that want to shoot this down the quickest are the ones that say, well, this isn't any good unless we can take Southern Miss and Louisiana Tech with us. I agree. But that's just not the scenario that's placed in front of us. And I've said it a million times, because it's been said to me a million times by Louisiana State folks and Southern Miss folks. If they had their choice, if this was on the table and they could go wherever, they would choose to stay with the Texas schools, because that's where they recruit a lot and they like that travelability for them. So it's not basically just your choice, as a Western fan or a Conference USA East fan. So anyway, I love that data. I mean, if you're a numbers guy, or if words don't make sense to you, but numbers do, this article, I'm telling you, you've got to go see it. You got maps and stuff in there too, right? Like some kind of, I mean, he went all out. I don't know if this was for some kind of class or something, but he put way more work into this than I would have done. So let's talk about some overall positives in your opinion about doing this merger, other than reducing the travel costs. Like, what do you like about bringing in the 5 teams out of the Sun Belt East that are and eliminating the 7 or 6 or so that are in the Conference USA West? What do you like about bringing those in?
Well, probably the team that I like the most is Appalachian State. Just the opportunity to play them every year. Every single year, they're going to bring out a quality football team that's going to get you a good quality win on your schedule. So that's definitely a positive for me. Playing Georgia Southern and Georgia State. So obviously they'll get to keep their rivalry with each other that they have. So that's definitely a positive for them. Obviously Western's going to keep their rivalries with Middle Tennessee and Marshall and vice versa. And that's probably all I have for the positives. I mean, really, if you just look at the map, it speaks for itself. It speaks volumes of just how smaller the conference really could potentially get.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and I right off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but I think we would drop down to, what was it, Trace? Did I say 8 states that we would span if we did that? Yeah, and I think that Conference USA is either in like 10 or 11 right now. And it's just, I mean, we can't talk about it enough. Texas just kills the budget. I mean, it just does. Nobody can go to those games. Nobody wants to go to those games. It's very expensive. And it's not like I don't want to go to San Antonio. I'd actually like to see that city and experience a weekend in that city. But, I mean, let's be honest. Am I going to pay for a round-trip plane ticket and all this kind of stuff and a couple nights in a hotel room and spend money to go have a good time and do all this stuff? Or would I rather hop in the car and drive to, Boone, North Carolina and watch Appalachian State game? It's, I mean, maybe not very cost efficient for me since I'm down in Florida, but for you guys, it might be a little bit more cost effective to be able to make a weekend road trip. So, Trace, let's talk positives and negatives. All right. Christian, I think some of the stats that Trace has got and some of this data that he's worked up, if you were a fence sitter, like, I don't know if I like this or not, the numbers that he's going to give you are going to sell you 100% on why this is a great idea. And for the rest of you listeners who think we're just blowing hot air up here, good old Trace and the data is getting ready to sell you big time on why this is awesome. Trace, before you get to the good stuff, give me the negatives if you can come up with any, really, because I got to hear them.
Well, that's what we were talking before the show, and really the only negative I can think of is it wouldn't be necessarily I guess it would be, but I guess it might not be the greatest geography. It might not be as good as say maybe the MAC would be, since the MAC's all in the same, basically right in the same area. Sunbelt East is a little more spread out, but even at that, it's still much, much closer than Conference USA is right now with the West Division and everything. So that's really the only con I can come up with is just that. And I don't even really think it's that big of a con. I think it's just kind of nitpicking. I
think I can squash that immediately because you do not have to travel north to play your games. You're going to travel south and to more coastal regions. So you'll be playing probably in better climates. So you would be willing to drive that extra 45 minutes or so or an hour or so to watch a game if it's not going to be freezing cold when you get there. So I think that would be a huge perk for most fans right there. They would travel the extra hour to watch a game in the warm weather. So, all right, positives. This is going to be good.
Yeah, there's some positives you could say for this one. So I'm looking at it in those categories that I talked about with the MAC. I compared Conference USA East and West since 2014, since they realigned, and all of the categories favor the East. Every single one. Conference titles, overall winning percentage, final ranked teams at the end of the year, Power 5 wins, bowl wins, draft picks, all in the favor of the Conference USA East. So clearly it's been the superior conference or division within Conference USA.
Yeah.
No debate there, I don't think. And then I've also compared the Sunbelt East and the Sunbelt West since they formed the divisions in 2018, and it's the same story. The Sunbelt East is far and away superior to the West. In the conference title aspect, 2-0 advantage, overall winning percentage, 59% to 44.4%. Had one team finish the season ranked, App State, last year or year before, I can't remember which. Power 5 wins 5-0, bowl wins 4-2, draft picks 4-3. So, it's just the same thing. The East is just much better. And then I also went a little farther and compared this as an overall out of both conferences, the Conference USA East and Sunbelt East combined. I compared to Conference USA West and Sunbelt West, comparing both of those. And again, same thing. Winning percentage, 51.8% to 44.3% advantage. Final teams ranked 3-0. Power 5 wins 12-5. Bowl wins 17-11. Draft picks 31-27. Conference titles 10-2. Now, 3 of those were before they had divisions, but it still counts. I'm still counting it because it was 2014. But it's just everything screams this is just the smartest idea. There's just really nothing that stands out against it, to be honest. And as far as attendances, I didn't go real deep into that, but last year's 2019 attendances, Sunbelt is right there with Sunbelt East is right there with anything Conference USA has. Actually, the Sunbelt East average was a little bit more than what Conference USA East average attendance was last year. So go figure there. But no, if you just want a competitive conference with some great teams, great programs, pretty good fan bases across the board. If you just went in, obviously geography is pretty good. I mean, it just makes sense. I think there's just way too many things going in its favor than not going in its favor. And I mean, that's best. I mean, that's really all I got. It's just better.
Yeah, it is just better. And if we're talking negatives, the only negatives for me by doing this is that you lose Louisiana Tech, Southern Miss, and UAB. Period. Yeah. You lose them as quality football opponents and quality basketball opponents. But outside of that, that's it, man. I mean, that is it. I would go for this conference almost in a heartbeat because this is what Conference USA should have done when they put together the latest rendition of the Conference USA.
Yep.
I mean, there are some teams that worked out. Middle Tennessee was really good in basketball when, after they came to Conference USA, that worked out for them quite well. FAU has been a bright spot in football because Lane Kiffin, brought some star power to them for the past couple of years. Western Kentucky is always fielding a quality basketball team and lit the world on fire in football several years back with Jeff Brom and crew there. So there have been some positives, but overall, it's been a swing and a miss on a lot of the other programs that they brought, especially those the UTSAs and the UTEPs or in the North Texases and stuff. So, as bad as I hate to say it, we don't need to be stretched out so far and not be more competitive. This option, at the very least, is a push in football. And that's talking about bringing in a powerhouse like Appalachian State at the G5 level, because you also have to bring in somebody like Coastal Carolina that doesn't win very many games. They're a young program, kind of like Charlotte. But you talk about bringing in Georgia State because you're getting a major metropolitan area now. You're getting Atlanta into the mix. You've got Charlotte already. You've got Charlotte in the mix. You've got some established teams that might be from smaller cities like Marshall. But Western Kentucky is in the largest or the fastest growing city in Kentucky. Bowling Green is the fastest growing city in Kentucky, by the way, in case you guys didn't know that. But I just think it screams, do this. It's common sense. So you saw the article that came out. I'm sure Trey saw it in the Herald Dispatch or the Charleston Gazette or something like that. And they were talking about that. And Mike Hamrick, Marshall Athletic Director, actually said, I have heard nothing about realignment in our discussions of how to solve problems, basically, in the Conference USA. So my question to you guys is, if they were actually discussing realignment scenarios, do you think they would say, oh, yeah, we've been talking about that for sure? Or do you think they're going to say, no, we haven't been talking about that at all? Christian, if that were you, if you were the AD and you were actively in a room with 20 other people, athletic directors and conference executives and stuff, and you're talking about how to solve problems, and somebody starts talking about conference realignment, and then you get interviewed, are you going to say, sure, we were talking about that? Or are you going to play that close to the vest? What would you do?
Honestly, I don't know if I would, because us fans, I don't think we see all the things that go into making a conference what it is, with all the TV deals and all that stuff going on. It's probably a lot harder than we would think to realign a conference. And so being the AD to step up and stand in there and say, yeah, we think this is a great idea, we've been talking about this, probably would take a lot of courage just going up to the conferences as a whole and telling them that.
I mean, but even if all of you guys are on the same page, yeah, we got to do something. All these ADs and executives are like, look, this model's not going to work for us. We're going to go under. We got to do something. And realignment is probably the best thing. You're still not going to come out and tell the newspaper, yeah, we're talking about realignment, because you want that rumor squashed. You don't want all the speculation, like who's going to go, where are they going to go, who's going to get left behind. You don't want that. You don't want your fan base in a tizzy. Right? You want people thinking, all right, they're not even exploring this option. This is why they suck. That's what you want people thinking. And then all of a sudden, bam, this new thing is done. And they were thinking about it. They were going to do it all along, but they just didn't want to tell everybody. So I don't put any stock into it. They can't tell you that they've eliminated any possibility. They haven't. They can't. We don't have the money as G5 programs to just say, we're not going to realign. We can't do that. Because if everybody's struggling, who's going to be around to collect an exit fee and an entrance fee if nobody's got any daggone money, right? If everybody's on the same page, then, ultimately they're going to have to do what's best for their school. That's what these ADs are charged with. Like Mike Hamrick's not doing what's best for Western Kentucky. Todd Stewart's not doing what's best for Marshall. They're doing what's best for their own school. So with that being said, do you think it's realistic that we will see realignment in some capacity? Trace, we'll start with you.
Are we talking immediate or?
I mean, when all the dust settles and, the level of financial impact and potential loss and ruin really starts to rear its ugly head, or maybe even before that, to try to curb what potential losses might be out there, do you think we see conference realignment, at least at a G5 level?
Well, I can't say for sure if we'll see it, but do I think it's realistic? Yeah, I think it's realistic. I mean, it's everything. That's what I've said it so many times. It's just, college athletics is always, they're constantly evolving. Everything is evolving constantly. Like you can't stay the same. You can't just stay put. It doesn't work like that anymore. I mean, for the MAC, I guess that's one of the rare examples. They stay.
Good point.
They stay the same. God, nothing changes them. But
death, taxes, and MAC. That's the three certainties of life.
You are right there. But no, other than the MAC, pretty much everybody else is changing. I mean, it's just how it is. I mean, and after a while, you just see it's like, I mean, not that any of those athletic directors or whoever's listening to this podcast, but I mean, they see this figures and stuff, and they just see it just makes more sense. I mean, you have to you have to think ahead. You can't just think in the moment. You got to think long term. And long term, obviously, I think a lot of those Sun Belt East teams will be a lot better conference mates than the Conference USA West Division, or most of the East Division for that matter. So, I mean, it can't be any more perfectly lined up, honestly.
Well, if you're thinking about a long-term solution, what are we doing here? I feel like that we are slowly bleeding to death. That's what it feels like, because we're stretched out, we're paying all this money all the time, and it's like we're the norm. It's like we're a regular family that's living paycheck to paycheck. That's what I feel like Conference USA is doing. I feel like they're living paycheck to paycheck. And if any other emergency arises, if they get if they suddenly wreck their car, how the hell are they going to pay for it? That's what I feel like Conference USA is. So, Christian, do you feel like conference realignment is a real possibility? Or even more so, do you feel like it's an inevitability, that it has to happen? So what are your thoughts on that?
So for me, I think it's going to take one of the Power 5 conferences to step up and realign and sort of get a domino effect going for all the other conferences to sort of look up to them and say, oh, the Big 12 did it, so why don't we go ahead and do it? Because they've explained all the benefits, and now they're on the table, and we see what's going on. So let's go ahead and explore this option. So if that were to occur, I think it's a real possibility that we could start to see a lot of conference realignments, especially after all this dust settles from the COVID-19.
Okay, so I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to. Let's explore that for a minute. So we're on the East Coast. We're East Coast team. So I don't think it's going to have much of an effect on us if, let's say some teams out of the Pac-12 leave and join the Big 12 or something like that. Let's say USC and UCLA or whatever leave the Pac-12 and they come to the Big. That's not going to affect us because what's going to happen? What's the next viable move? Boise State might get a call, or somebody like Air Force might get a call or something like that. I don't know, but that's not going to trickle all the way over to us. So we saw the big waves in the Big Ten and the ACC not too long ago. When Rutgers. I don't know how they got that invite to the Big Ten.
Unbelievable.
They did. And then you saw Maryland just flip-flop from one to the other. And so at that point, you got to think if there's any realignment whatsoever, you're going to look at a team like UCF or USF. And even though that USF is not ridiculously competitive, they are in a major metropolitan area in Florida, and that goes a long way. So UCF has done it on the field, and that you got to be thinking they're a first mover of an East Coast type G5 school to get a call. Now, at that point, that begs the question: all right, so where are you going to go? The American. So I mean, you're going to have one, maybe two spots, maybe. Who's going to get those calls? You know, I mean, you remember a couple of years ago when the American added Wichita State and everybody started politicking immediately like, hey, we're the next one you need to add. Look at us, this, and it went nowhere. So that scares me really because I don't even know that would help enough teams to really shake it up. Not to the extent that we as G5s need a shakeup to alleviate some of the bills we're paying. So that's a tough scenario. I think the G5s need to just leverage or come together and put their leverage on some people and say, hey, you can't schedule a whole year without G5 schools. You know you need us, right? You can't play an all P5 schedule. There's not enough games. There's not enough teams. You need us. And I've been beating this drum for 5 years until the G5s really stop bowing down and begging for scraps at these Power 5 tables. When you sign a one and done deal, that bad boy ought to be for $3 million plus, period. It shouldn't be no $1.5 million. It should be $3-4 million. Hit them where they got the money. So hit them in the wallet. They can afford to pay you. Right. And if we all did that, they would have to pay that. It's not like, you know, we're like, well, I'm not paying Western Kentucky $4 million because Middle Tennessee State will take $1.5 million. Well, if Middle Tennessee State didn't take a freaking $1.5 million, they'd have to pay the big money to everybody. I think that's the number one thing that needs to happen. And then we could really start to stave off, you know, the financial ruin of a disaster like this. But I think in lieu of that happening, athletic directors and conference officials are just going to have to sit down and go, guys, this is what we got to do. You know, I mean, we've got to be geographically friendly. We've got to cut our bills. We can't just lay people off. They're college athletes. You can't just send them home, you know, or else you might look at, you know, might start seeing things like reduction in scholarships and, you know, things we don't want to see happening. So it's an excellent discussion. It was a good point about the Power 5 realignment, but I think those guys are pretty happy, to be honest with you. They're fat and sassy and just getting paid. They're all a bunch of Scrooge McDucks swimming in vaults full of money, you know, while we're begging for pennies. But Sunbelt East, Conference USA East, let's make it freaking happen. Let's get out of here on this note. Trace, give us some final thoughts, and we'll let Christian talk about whatever he wants to talk about, and then we'll get out of here this week.
Yeah, really good discussion, really good topic. I knew it was going to be. I was excited to talk about it and get on here and do it because, I mean, that conference realignment's always a big topic for college football fans, college basketball fans, whatever you want to look at. It's a big topic of conversation. Has been forever, will continue to be. As far as our plan of what we would like to see, I mean, I dare you to try to shoot that down. I mean, Conference USA East and Sunbelt East just makes sense. In pretty much every aspect, it just makes sense. And one other image or graphic that I saw on Twitter the other day that I was going to share on here, but I forgot, I'm going to do it now, is the past 6, dating back to 2014, the past 6 years of Conference USA football champions, the men's basketball champions, Sunbelt football champions, and Sunbelt men's basketball champions. Almost all of them from the East. I mean, that 2014, 15, 16, 17 in football for the Conference USA East. 2018 was UAB. 2019 was FAU East again. Men's basketball, same thing. 2016 and 17, Middle. 2018, Marshall. 2019, Old Dominion. All those teams are in the East. Sunbelt football. So Georgia Southern in 2014, East. 2016, East. 2017, 18, 19, East. Sunbelt men's hoops champions, 2015, East. 2017, 18, 19, East. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, for lack of a better term. It's just there. So the East is far superior in both conferences. So let's just create a big power conference of our own, right? Power 6, baby. That's what we're going for.
We're gunning for the American.
Power 7.
All right, Christian, I don't know if you've listened to the show or not, but if you haven't, that's okay. At the end of the show, it's your time to talk about whatever you want. If you don't want to talk about this merger or you want to self-promote a little bit, tell people where they can find you on Twitter or wherever you are on social media, I suggest you do that. maybe we'll get some followers your way. So take it away. Any final thoughts you got?
Awesome. Well, I mean, you two guys did an awesome job of just the facts are all out there for all of us, not just Conference USA and Sun Belt, but all G5 schools. I mean, we all got to band together here and really try to get this message spread out to as many people as possible. Because, I mean, there could come a time where we're going to have to make cuts to sports we love, and we don't want to see that happen at the end of the day.
No.
So it's really important to get this message out and spread it to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge football fan. I'm a huge basketball guy. I don't know much about it, but I like watching it. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a lot of respect for those quote-unquote non-revenue sports. Those athletes work their butts off from the time they're little kids, just like football players do. And you can't tell me that some guy or some girl that goes out there and earns a tennis scholarship doesn't deserve it just because they don't put on a football uniform. They do.
Right.
And by and large, those folks realize that this is their ticket to a quality education. A lot of times those guys go on to be doctors and nurses and things that we actually need at a time in our lives right now. So you think about that type of angle where you are eliminating potentially things like soccer or diving or whatever that you don't think about. You might be eliminating doctors and nurses and teachers from the workforce, because maybe otherwise they don't go to college because their athletic scholarship was their way in, just like a lot of other athletes are. So it's just other things to think about. It's more than just college sports. This is a generation of potential essential workers that you might be affecting. Where can the folks find you on the Twitterverse, Christian?
So my Twitter handle is just Christian Blair 0. So just my name and then a 0 at the end. Then I'm also on the Towel Rack. So
how long have you been with those guys?
I've actually only been with them for about a month I submitted the article. I had done like a research paper on Conference USA realignment, and I sent that to Ross over at the Towel Rack, and he actually offered me a job to write for the Towel Rack. So that was a pretty good gig right there.
Yeah. Little initiative land, and now you're on some, pretty awesome podcast. Just talking about your work. And next stop, the moon. Who knows?
Yeah. All the way.
No, we're glad to have you on here, man. We're just a couple of guys. If Steven would have been here, we'd have been a trio of guys that just like to talk sports and, talk about Western and talk about Marshall. So we're glad to have you on. You're welcome back anytime you'd like to come. Please don't wait for an invite. Hit me in the DMs and say, hey, man, I'd like to come back on the show, and we will make it happen. As far as for me, this was a good episode because I really think this is something that needs to happen. I almost think we're nearing that necessity level of it needing to happen, not just it'd be cool if it happened. I think this is something that within too much longer of a time frame is going to have to happen because let's face it, the rich are going to get richer and the gap between the haves and the have-nots is only going to get greater. So if there's an opportunity to reduce your costs, really add some value in football and a little bit of value maybe in basketball and some other sports like baseball. I mean, Coastal Carolina was a national champion a couple years ago. National champion. So I think you have to do that. The time to strike is when the iron's hot. And right now the iron is kind of hot. It's not white hot, but it's getting pretty damn red with all that's going on in the world. So I think Conference USA East athletic directors, school presidents, they just kind of need to band together. I mean, let's do this. If half the conference walks, what are they going to do? I mean, Trace's data just told you that the competitiveness lies primarily with the East. I mean, Louisiana Tech and Southern Miss, they're no slouches. A lot of respect to them. UAB, a lot of respect to them too. But the Texas schools are just young and they're, not really got a strong foothold yet. And they're constantly competing with teams like SMU and Houston and Texas A&M and every other school that's recruiting there. So they're just fighting an uphill battle on their own. So they should want to fight that battle with a smaller geographic footprint as well. I can't think of why anybody in San Antonio would want to send their soccer team to Huntington, West Virginia, or Norfolk either. It's not like it's a one-way street. So this just makes too much sense all the way around. And if you're a fan of Western, you're a fan of Marshall, any Appalachian State, Coastal Carolina, Georgia State, Southern Troy, Charlotte, Old Dominion, Middle Tennessee State, FAU, FIU, whatever. If you're one of those fans, you should be getting on this movement and saying, man, this is really what we need to do. I think we could, that team in football, that conference lineup in football, any given year could have a team that competes for that New Year's Six bowl slot. And that's huge. With a couple of years of competitiveness, you might be pushing a 2-bid league in basketball. You never know. We were close a couple of years ago, I just think it needs to be done. But anyway, let's get out of here this week. Find us on Twitter at MoonshineTD, at MSTD_podcast. And of course, you can find the show anywhere that you can find a podcast. We're on iHeart, Spotify, I always say iTunes, but it's Apple Podcasts now. Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Castbox, and something else. So until next week, I'll pick up the slack for Steven until we can get him in here again. Go Tops, Trace.
Go Herds.
Christian, we appreciate you coming. We'll see you next week. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.